Welcome back, everybody. We're going to do a tomato review on this tomato right here, and this is called the Boxcar Willie tomato. Now, I've done reviews on it in the past, but I figured I'd revisit it. It's been a number of years since the first time I reviewed it, so let's give this another review. And so here's a typical shape, typical size for this tomato. Oftentimes they get much rounder. They'll be perfectly round, but large, almost like a big boy tomato. Or they get slightly flattened like this. I guess it really depends on the the season that it's growing. But this is a pretty nice tomato. I'd probably say it's 4 to 6 ounces. It's a nice sized tomato. Here's a look at the inside. Alright, that's what it looks like on the inside. And what we'll do just for you is we will put the scale here and we'll weigh it. Just give it a second for it to zero. Alright, let's see what that weighs. 4.7 ounces. Yeah, I was close. I was about right on that. And 3 ounces. I've seen these tomatoes get larger than that. They can get up to like 6 or 7 ounces. I mean, these things can get pretty big, so they can make a pretty good sized tomato. So let's do a bricks. Okay, it's a little bit over 6 on the bricks, just a slight bit, not quite a quarter over, but a little bit over on the bricks. 6 on the bricks. So let's give that a taste test and see what it tastes like. Sorry about that. Papers are getting blown all over the place. A little bit windy out. All right, let's give this a rating here. All right, so the first thing we want to do is start with the sweetness on this tomato. Sweetness was probably around a 28 on the sweetness. It was pretty nice. It was a little bit above average. So the sweetness was there, but it's a mild type of a sweetness. It wasn't like a fructosey, sugary type of a sweetness. It's a mild type of sweetness. It was present, and that sweetness balances off that tangy. If you don't have enough sweetness, the tangy starts to get really tardy in flavor. So, and you know, the way it hits your tongue, the way it affects your tongue. So the sweetness, I'm probably going to put that, like I said, somewhere around 27, 28 on the sweetness. It was a little bit above average. It was pretty good. Tangy part was a little bit higher than that. We're going to say about 30 on the tangy. It was a nice little tangy draw to you. It had a nice little acidity, tomato acidity draw back to the back of the tongue. It really delivers that flavor back there, and it kind of hangs around. The tangy part is just right. So in general, when I rate tomatoes as far as sweetness and tangy, you always want that tangy part to be at least a couple digits higher. So if I say 25 on the sweetness, you want your tanginess to be around 28, 29. Usually that's a really good balance. You don't want it perfectly right in the middle, though sometimes that does work out. It really depends on the concentration of tomato flavor. But between the sweet and the tangy, if the number of the tangy part is a little higher, that's good, because you're getting a little bit of sweetness, but that tanginess is really what's going to help deliver that tomato flavor to the back of your tongue. So yeah, that I would probably say the tangy was probably right 29, 30. I'd say probably 30 on the tangy. It was pretty present in that flavor profile. Now, as far as the tomato flavor goes, it was a pretty dominant flavor. That's one of the first things I was thinking of as I was eating the tomato. It has a pretty prominent flavor. If you eat it with the seeds, you're really going to get that tomato flavor really hang around. A lot of that flavor is encapsulated within the seed gel that's in there. So if I was to give that a number from 0 to 10, with 10 being the highest, I'm probably going to be giving that somewhere around an 8 for the tomato intensity flavor. Again, when we talk about tomato flavor, we're talking about how present was that tomato flavor. We're not rating how delicious it tasted. We're rating it based on its presence in the tomato profile. How present was that tomato flavor? How strong was that tomato flavor overall in the delivery package of this whole profile of flavor? Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about tomato flavor. Now, let's get over to the moisture. This was a pretty moist tomato. It's very typical for this tomato to be quite moist. This tomato, if I was to put it on a moisture level, I'm going to put it at a 7. Usually you want to be somewhere between 6 and 6.5. with your tomato moisture. This was a little bit above that, but it was fine. It's a nice wet tomato experience. It's the kind of tomato you're just going to be sloppering juice everywhere is going to come out of this thing. You have to cut it up in cubes, get your salt out, throw your salt on there, and then eat it right away. Now, if you take that tomato and cut it up in cubes and put salt on it and let it sit for a minute in your bowl, you'll notice if you come back 10 minutes later, that whole bowl will be filled with liquid, because the salt is a desiccant and it just draws the water out of the tomato. It's not desiccant. That's probably the wrong word. Salt is hygroscopic, so it draws water. And so when you put salt on the tomato, it's really going to draw the water out of it. That's one of the ways that you can make your tomato sauce too, by the way, if you're all right with using salt. You just draw a lot of that water directly out of it by adding the salt directly to the raw tomatoes before you cook them. Draws all that water out, and then you're left with basically the paste. That's not the way I like to make tomato sauce. I just grind everything up. I like wet tomatoes. I don't like dry tomatoes at all. I'd rather get slobbery with a wet tomato than creamy with a dry, creamy tomato. Just not my thing, you know. So yeah, we'll go with a 7 on the moisture. It was pretty high. It was a little above average, it was still fine. That's not going to downrate it in any way. Tardy and sour, there was a slight bit of tardiness in there, but it was really low. I'm probably going to say below 1. You want to say 0.5 on the tardy, you could say that. It was a little something there, and it was nice. It was a very nice little effect that comes along with this tomato. It's the aftertaste is where you're really going to pick that tardiness up. When I refer to tardiness, I'm generally referring to an effect that I can sense in the back of my jaw area, very similar to the type of effect you get from eating a lemon. So that's what I'm referring to when we're talking about tardiness. All right, and sourness is a little bit different. I should actually separate that. Sourness is a little bit different. Some tomatoes tend to get almost like it's a fermented flavor to it, and it's kind of sour in nature rather than tang or tardy, where tardy kind of puckers the back of your jaw. The sourness kind of does a little something different. So I should separate that, but it's very uncommon to have tomatoes that have a soury type flavor. But some of the green tomatoes have that soury type effect. Green Crim is kind of one that has a soury type effect. So if I was to give that tardiness a number, again, it's going to be below 1. You know, pick your poison. You want to say 0.5, that works for me. Undertones, there's no undertones with this tomato at all. This tomato, I could be wrong about this. I believe this tomato was a commercial variety at one time, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was. So it's very uniform in flavor. You're not going to get any earthy tones. You're not going to get any smoky tones. You're not going to get anything funky out of this tomato. In general, this tomato is not going to have any undertones to it. So you're not going to get that heirloom funkiness type of aftertaste with it. It's bred to be more of a commercial or a market more type of tomato for people who open up vendor tables and they want to sell a very commercial variety tomato, but yet heirloom or open pollinated varieties where it's not so much a strict commercial variety tomato. So there was no undertones with that, so we're going to go with a 0. Texture was just about perfect on the texture. I'm going to put that texture at a 9. That texture on that tomato is an absolutely classic, perfect type of texture when it comes to the texture. Like if you want to slice it up and put a slice on your hamburger, for example, right? You need a certain texture. If it's too dry, it's mushy, and that kind of ruins it really good. You might buy really high-grade hamburger meat, and you put a mushy, creamy, nasty type of tomato on there, and it's just going to ruin a very expensive hamburger because you probably paid a lot for that particular hamburger meat. Like if you're like me, when I buy hamburger meat, I don't just buy Walmart hamburger meat. I buy hamburger meat that's chopped and ground from a butcher. And we got a local butcher here, for example. So when I buy my hamburger meat, it's going to be organic, grass-fed meats, and it's probably going to be sirloin or it's going to be filet mignon, and it's ground into hamburger meat. That's the highest grade you could get. Now, just keep that in mind. I don't eat that much hamburger, but when I do eat it, it's going to be the highest grade. I'll spend the extra money. And so I'm not going to want a really crummy, dry, creamy type of tomato on there. I'm going to want a classic, very good, wet and moist, bites and breaks up with your bite when you bite it. It doesn't squish out of the side of the tomato type of tomato on my hamburger. And this is the perfect tomato for that type of application. It's not, necessarily big enough to cover the whole hamburger. But if you slice it really thin and you put 2 or 3 layers on it and it's really thin slices, you can put 2 or 3 layers on that, that's fine. that'll work out good. But the texture on that tomato is, we're going to go with a 9 on that texture. I'm going with a 9, guys. That is a perfect type of texture. It doesn't really get too much better than that. I mean, that's it. That's a classic texture you want. That's a perfect texture on that. Production, it's an okay producer. I'm going to put that at an average number as a 5. In general, it's not the greatest producer of tomatoes, but it does produce about average. And you're going to get at least a dozen to 2 dozen tomatoes just like this, and maybe even larger. If you really grow it in good soil and the plant doesn't get blighted out, these tomatoes can get quite larger. They can almost double in size, and they can get pretty big, and oftentimes they get very round. And they're not, this one's slightly flattened, but they can get very round. They have very large, round tomatoes. And so, production-wise, I'm just going to go average, and I think it's going to produce what it should produce for this type of tomato. So we're going average on that. Skins were good. I'm going to put that, again, at average. The skins broke up, didn't have to spit them out. Didn't have anything stuck to the top of my roof of my mouth. Or sometimes the skins, when they're really thick, sometimes as you're chewing it up, a piece of that might get stuck between your teeth. And now you really got to pick the skin out of your teeth. It's a real pain in the neck, and it's not really something you want to be doing in front of, you might have guests over, or you're at a barbecue or something, you're eating a salad, and all of a sudden a piece of that skin gets stuck between your teeth, and now you got to stick your hands in your mouth to pull the skin out. That's inappropriate, and you don't want tomato like that, especially in a situation like that. This particular tomato, I didn't have any experience with that at all. Skins, again, I'm going to go about average, probably go a little above average, probably go on a 3 on the average on that. You could probably just go slightly above that, and you could say that it was a little bit better. It just broke up nice. There were no pieces left in my mouth or nothing. As far as seeds go, I'm going to go about average on the seeds. It's a pretty good seed producer. The seeds on this variety of tomato are a little larger in nature than a lot of the other seeds that I save. So it's a larger type of seed, and it produces about an average amount. In some cases, depending on the size of the tomato, it can produce quite a bit of seeds. But as you could see in the where I sliced it on the inside, you can see there's seeds well integrated to the entire tomato. So it does produce a good amount of seeds. So if you're somebody who's making sauces, or you're making paste or something like that, and you want a tomato variety where it doesn't have as many seeds, well, this is going to be an average tomato with the average amount of seeds in it. If you're somebody who's growing these tomatoes specifically for seeds and you want more seeds, no, this is a good shot. You can probably grow a few of these plants out and get enough seed for your supplies if that's what you're looking to do as well. So again, I'm just going to go average on the seeds, which is about a 5 on there. So now we're going to go to the overall rating. How do I rate this tomato from 1 to 10 being the lowest and 1 being the highest? Well, we're going to go with a number 1 on this one, because the Boxcar Willie's is won out every time I grow it. It's always been a top-rated tomato for me. It's a classic. It has the uniform classic flavor. It never fails to produce the same quality in tomato that I look for from year to year. So when I'm like know that I'm going to be doing a lot of barbecuing and cooking and salads for a particular year, I'll grow a couple of these plants specifically for myself, not even to save seeds, but just to chop up and utilize within my cooking, just for that purpose. And I will do that with this variety because it delivers a perfect tomato every time. And yeah, sometimes your plants might die early, and you'll get green tomatoes, and you dry those green, you ripen those green tomatoes on the table, that kind of a thing. Yeah, they're not going to taste as good. But if you let if your plant doesn't get blighted out, and you let these tomatoes ripen on a plant until they get a nice, rich color like this, you're going to get a high quality, AAA rated type of tomato. It's one of the best tomatoes you can grow out there. It's never failed. I've been eating this tomato now for years. And I always go back to it. In fact, I miss it for the years that I don't grow, because there are years that go by I just don't grow because I don't have the room. And I miss it because this tomato is something that after eating store-bought tomatoes all winter, this tomato is something that I absolutely crave when it comes time to growing my own tomatoes and getting into my own salads and stuff. So coming out of a winter and then into a tomato variety like this is like going to heaven, seriously. All right, so yes, that's this is going to be a number 1, guys. This is all the way up there. Unfortunately, I cannot rate this tomato, ever rate it lower. It's always been a winner for me, and I always recommend it for anybody who's you don't know anything about tomatoes and they want to grow a good tasting, all-purpose, general round, almost commercial variety of tomato. I wouldn't call it commercial. It might even be an heirloom, but I don't believe it is. I think it's just an open pollinated variety that's been grown for many years. But it's a good one, guys. This is one. If you've never grown a Boxcar Willie, this is it right here. This is tomato. This is definitely one of the tomatoes you want to put on your roster. All right. So what I'll do is I'll leave whatever information I have on the Boxcar Willie in the description below, and I will also put it on the website. Keep in mind, if I do any updating to the description, it's usually not going to be in the video. I will update the website, and you know, I'll update the details in there, and you can see any updates over there. I will also leave a link below where I'll take you to the page where you can actually purchase a seed for this tomato if you decide that you want to give this one a grow. And I do recommend this one. So that's really it, guys. That is your tomato review for the Boxcar Willie. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.